Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, leave a comment, and check out the amazing products in the description. Now enjoy the story.
I've never been one to believe in supernatural stories. I grew up in a pragmatic family in West Texas, where we learned early on that the only real monsters are the ones who walk on two legs and wear hats like ours. That's what my dad always said, at least. But now, looking at the sky through the small hospital window, I can't stop trembling thinking that maybe he was wrong. Some things just don't have an explanation, and what happened on the dry banks of the Brazos River is one of them. It all started 3 weeks ago when I decided to take a few days off from my monotonous job at a law firm in Austin to visit my Uncle Dan at his property near Newcastle in Young County. He'd bought that piece of land a couple of years ago and kept inviting me to see the place. It's a hunter's paradise, he'd say, deer everywhere, and the silence is so deep you can hear your own thoughts. I needed that silence. The big city was wearing me down, and the idea of spending a few days away from the traffic and noise was too tempting to refuse. I got there on a Thursday afternoon. Uncle Dan's property was about half a mile from the dry bed of the Brazos River, a winding strip of sand and rocks that only fills up during the rare storms that hit this part of Texas. The rest of the time, it's just an arid valley with a few puddles here and there, surrounded by twisted bushes and cacti. His cabin was rustic but comfortable. We spent that first night drinking beer on the porch while he told me stories about the area. That's when he mentioned the dead animals he'd been finding. "It's the strangest thing, Mike," he said, taking a long swig of his beer. "Last week, I found 3 dead coyotes near the riverbed. It wasn't like they'd been attacked by other predators. They were, well, I don't know how to describe it. It looked like something had grabbed them from above." I remember laughing, asking if he thought a mountain lion had learned to skydive. He didn't find it funny. The bodies had strange marks, like something with huge claws had pinned them by the shoulders, tearing them almost to the bone. And what confuses me most is that the wounds were from above. What kind of animal attacks like that? I shrugged and suggested it could be some kind of large bird of prey, maybe an eagle. But even as I spoke, I knew it didn't make sense. No eagle in Texas was big enough to do that kind of damage to an adult coyote. Uncle Dan agreed and changed the subject, but I noticed he kept looking at the horizon, towards the river, with an uneasy expression. The next day, we decided we'd go hunting. We woke up before dawn, geared up, and headed into the brush. Uncle Dan suggested we go north, away from the riverbed. When I asked why, he just mumbled something about the terrain being better for tracking deer. But I could sense there was another reason. We hunted all morning without luck. Around noon, I suggested we split up to cover more ground. Uncle Dan hesitated but eventually agreed. "Just don't go too far south, towards the river," he warned. "That area's no good for hunting anyway." Naturally, as soon as we separated, I started walking unconsciously south. It wasn't that I was deliberately ignoring his warning, it was more like something was pulling me in that direction. After about an hour of walking, I realized I was much closer to the riverbed than I should have been. The midday heat was relentless, and I decided to take a break in the shade of a cluster of mesquite trees before heading back. That's when I heard it. A sound of flapping, like huge wings cutting through the air, followed by a sharp cry that didn't seem to come from any animal I knew. The sound was strangely metallic, as if it was passing through some kind of unnatural filter. My hair stood on end instantly. I jumped to my feet, gripping my rifle tightly. The sound had come from somewhere ahead of me, closer to the riverbed. The rational part of my brain told me to turn around and go back to where Uncle Dan was, but something in me wanted to find out what had made that sound. I moved forward slowly, each step cautious on the stony ground. As I approached the riverbed, the silence became almost palpable. No birds were singing, no insects were buzzing. It was as if all life had decided to hide. That's when I saw the first carcass. It was a deer, or what was left of it. It lay on its side, with huge gashes on its shoulders and along its back. But the most disturbing thing was that the meat seemed to have been torn off in systematic strips, as if whatever had killed it was more interested in experimenting than feeding. while I was examining the body, I heard that flapping sound again. Much closer this time. I spun around quickly, rifle raised, but saw nothing but the barren plains and the bushes swaying slightly in the breeze. I decided it was time to go back. Something was wrong in this place, and Uncle Dan's warning now made a lot more sense. I was halfway back when the sun began to set. I was lost. Somehow, in my haste to get away from the riverbed, I had gone in the wrong direction and now had no idea where I was. I tried to use my cell phone to orient myself, but there was no signal in that remote area. Night fell fast, as it always does in the desert. And with it came a biting cold that penetrated to the bone. I knew I had no choice but to set up a small camp and wait until dawn. I found a relatively flat area between some rocks, which offered a bit of protection from the wind, and prepared to spend the night. It was around 2 in the morning when I woke up startled. I didn't know what had awakened me until I heard it again, that sound of wings. But now it wasn't just the sound. There was something else, a presence. I could feel eyes watching me in the darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly swept the area around me. The beam of light wavered over the rocks and bushes, revealing nothing but the usual shadows of the desert at night. I was about to turn off the flashlight when something reflected the light for a fraction of a second. 2 bright dots, like eyes, about 7 feet off the ground, hovering above a large bush. My heart pounded. Those eyes were too high to belong to any animal that normally roamed around here. And then, they moved. Not sideways, like an animal darting through the bushes, but upwards. Whatever it was climbing. I pointed my rifle in the direction of those eyes and, with trembling hands, tried to aim. But before I could pull the trigger, the eyes disappeared. The next second, I heard the sound of wings again, this time directly above me. I looked up and almost dropped the flashlight. Hovering about 30 feet in the air was a figure that my brain refused to process. It was vaguely humanoid, but with enormous wings that stretched at least 10 feet from each side of its body. Its skin, or whatever covered its body, seemed to absorb the light from my flashlight instead of reflecting it, creating a black silhouette against the starry sky. But the worst part was the eyes. Red, not like blood, but like embers, glowing with an intensity that seemed to penetrate directly into my soul. And they were fixed on me. I fired the rifle without even thinking. The blast echoed through the rocks, but the creature only shifted slightly, as if it had been pushed by a light breeze. Then, with a movement that seemed both elegant and grotesque, it swooped down towards me. I ran. I dropped the rifle and ran like I had never run before. I could hear the flapping of wings behind me, getting closer and closer. The uneven terrain made me stumble every few steps, but pure terror kept me from falling. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I needed to get away from that thing. That's when I saw the lights in the distance. A road, maybe. Or a house. It didn't matter, as long as there were other people. I redirected my course towards the lights, ignoring the thorny bushes that tore at my clothes and skin. The creature let out another of those metallic shrieks, so close that I felt like it pierced my eardrums. Then I felt something sharp sink into my right shoulder, followed by excruciating pain that made me scream. I was lifted off the ground for a brief moment before the claws released, probably because my weight was too much for the creature to carry in full flight. I fell hard onto the stony ground, hitting my head on a rock. My vision blurred, but I could still see the creature circling above me, preparing for another attack. At that moment, I heard the sound of an engine. Headlights cut through the darkness, and for the first time, I could clearly see what was chasing me. It was like a man, but it wasn't a man. Its skin was dark and wrinkled, like old leather, and its face was a distorted parody of human features, with eyes that were too large and a mouth that looked more like a gash full of sharp teeth. And those wings, they were like those of a giant bat, with thin membranes stretched between long bony fingers. The creature let out another shriek, this time of frustration, when the headlights illuminated it. With a few powerful beats of its wings, it gained altitude and disappeared into the darkness of the night. The vehicle, Uncle Dan's old Jeep, skidded to a stop beside me. He jumped out, rifle in hand, frantically scanning the night sky. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked when I stumbled towards him. "The Birdman. The Brazos River creature." I could barely nod before I passed out from blood loss. I woke up 3 days later in the county hospital. My right shoulder was bandaged, and the doctors told me I needed over 50 stitches to close the wound. According to them, it looked like I'd been attacked by a wild animal, probably a mountain lion that managed to catch me by surprise. Uncle Dan didn't contradict them in front of me, but when we were alone, he told me the truth he already knew. The creature was known to the few locals, although most preferred to pretend it didn't exist. They called it the Brazos Birdman, and stories about it went back hundreds of years, to the first European settlers and before that, to the native tribes of the region. "It's not an animal, Mike," Uncle Dan explained in a low voice. "And it's not a man either. It's something else. Something that shouldn't exist in this world, but it does. And for some reason, it's fixated on the dry bed of the Brazos River." He told me how, over the years, people had disappeared in that area. Most of the time, the disappearances were attributed to accidents, people getting lost in the unforgiving desert, or being killed by wild animals. But the locals knew better. Most avoided the riverbed, especially after sunset. When I was discharged from the hospital, I didn't go back to Uncle Dan's cabin. I went straight to Austin, to my city apartment, to the noise and lights and constant presence of other people. I told myself I would never go back to that part of Texas again. But here I am, 3 weeks later, still waking up every night in a cold sweat, with the sound of those wings echoing in my ears. The doctor said my shoulder will heal completely, although I'll probably have an impressive scar for the rest of my life. Physically, I'm getting better. Mentally, it's another story. I can't stop thinking about the Brazos Birdman. I keep wondering how many other creatures like it are out there, hidden in the remote parts of our world, places where we rarely go, or where we have the good sense not to stay after nightfall. Yesterday, I got a call from Uncle Dan. His voice was different, tense, and worried. He said he's been seeing the creature more often lately, hovering near his cabin after dark. And worst of all, he found marks on the porch, as if something with huge claws had landed there while he was sleeping. "I think it's looking for you, Mike," he said, his voice almost a whisper. "I think, somehow, you made an impression on it. And now it wants to finish what it started." I hung up the phone and sat in the dark for a long time. Part of me wants to believe that this is all paranoia, that what I saw that night was just some unidentified animal and my mind filled in the rest with fear and local superstition. But then I touch the scar on my shoulder, feel the ridges of stitched flesh where the creature's claws sank in, and I know I can't fool myself. The Brazos Birdman is real. And for some reason I'll never fully understand, our lives are now intertwined. I don't know what I'll do next. Part of me wants to run, maybe to another state, as far away from the Brazos River as possible. But another part, a part one don't recognize and that scares me, wants to go back. Wants to face the creature again. Wants to understand what it is and why it exists. As I look out the hospital window at the night sky, I can't help but search for a dark silhouette against the stars, wings outstretched, glowing red eyes fixed on me. Because I know, deep down in my being, that this isn't over. The Brazos Birdman found me once. And I have a terrible feeling it will find me again.
We've reached the end of our story. What did you think? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to follow the channel, like the video, and check out the amazing products in the description. And don't miss the next video, you're going to love it.